Welcome to the chapter 15 video where we're going to talk about the urinary system. So with this chapter, we're going to break it down probably into two videos, one where we're looking at the structures of the urinary system and their functions, and then we'll do a second video where we talk about how the urine's formed, kind of the process that happens in the kidney that allows the formation of the urine, kind of what regulates urine production, and we'll finish up with some issues or diseases that can happen with the urinary system. Okay, so getting into it, the urinary system is really important for regulating our body fluids and also helping get rid of waste that we make due to other processes in our bodies. So we've talked about the digestive system, the respiratory system, and the integumentary system. And all of those are important in terms of excretion and removing waste from the body. The last system we're going to focus on this semester is the urinary system, so the kidneys. Now, the digestive system, we mentioned, gets rid of food residues and waste produced by the liver. The respiratory system gets rid of carbon dioxide that's produced during cellular respiration. Integumentary system gets rid of water, gets rid of salt. And then the urinary system is going to get rid of our nitrogenous waste, excess solutes, and then also excess water. And so again, it's helping to regulate the fluid volume that's within our bodies. And so we've seen this figure before, where we have the circulatory system interacting with the urinary system, respiratory system, the skin, the digestive tract. And here in this video with this chapter, we're going to focus on the urinary system. So we've talked about everything else in regards to this figure before now. So we're going to finish up with the urinary system itself. Now, the kidneys are super important because they help maintain water volume in our bodies. So they help to maintain homeostasis in that regard. So the kidney will adjust our water output based on how much water we put into our body and how much water we are losing from our body. So input sources are things like food and drink, and then also metabolism. So remember, with cellular respiration, you can get water from that metabolic process, so you can get metabolic water. Now, ways we can lose water is from our lungs, so water vapor, sweating from our skin, feces, so when we defecate, we can lose water, and then through our kidneys. And so we're going to talk about how the kidneys will modify that output. And that output is based on how much water we're taking in and how much water we're losing on a regular basis. And so our output from the kidneys can vary anywhere from half a liter per day to about a liter per hour, again, depending on how much water you're bringing in versus how much water you're losing in other sources. So if we look at our losses and gains per day in terms of water, typically we will get about 1,000 milliliters per day from fluids, about 1,200 from our food, and about 300 through metabolic production. So roughly on average about 2,500 milliliters of input. So that means our output is going to roughly equal that. So our evaporative loss from our lungs is about 500, from our skin is about 3,500, and feces is about 150. Not 3,500, 350. And so the remaining, so this is roughly 1,000, and so the remaining difference is 1,500, and so your urine so the kidneys would produce urine that would get rid of that excess, so the remaining 1,500 to equal the inputs, right? So you want that balance, right? You want to maintain a specific water volume. So not only do the kidneys regulate that water volume, but they also regulate nitrogenous waste that's produced within our bodies. So protein metabolism produces nitrogenous waste, right? So ammonia is produced whenever you break down amino acids. the liver will detoxify that ammonia and turn it into urea. The urea then moves from the liver to the kidneys, where the kidneys will get rid of that urea. Other solutes that the kidneys will get rid of things are like sodium chloride, potassium, calcium, excess hydrogen ions, and creatine. Um, and so we're going to talk a lot about how the kidneys kind of do this process in regulating the waste and the water excretion, mainly in the second video for this chapter. And so in the first video, we're really going to focus on, in this video, we're going to focus on the structure of the urinary system. And so with the urinary system, the kind of principal organ are the kidneys. We have two kidneys, so left and right, and the kidney has different sections or different regions of the kidney. You have the cortex, you have the medulla, and then you have the renal pelvis. So the cortex is the outer portion of the kidney, the medulla is the inner region of the kidney, and then the renal pelvis is the area that collects the urine after the urine is produced in the nephrons. So if we look at a figure of these different organs and the sections or regions of the kidney, you have the kidney itself, right, which are these bean-shaped structures here. And so we zoom into a kidney. This is what it looks like with a cross section. So the cortex is this outer area here, right? So this yellow looking area. The medulla are these kind of seed-shaped, triangular-shaped regions in the kidney. And then the ducts that will collect the kidney from the medulla, collect the urine from the medulla, is the renal pelvis. So this area here is the renal pelvis. And then that renal pelvis will connect to the ureter, which will carry urine to the bladder, and then the bladder will store that urine until it's released, and then the urethra will allow the urine to exit the body. And so the kidneys are connected to the ureter, which goes to the bladder, which goes to the urethra. Now there are renal arteries and veins that bring the blood supply to and from the kidney itself. And then if we zoom in to one kind of area in the kidney, one medulla and cortex region, this is what it looks like here. So this figure on the right. So you have the medulla, which is this kind of reddish area, the cortex, which is that outer area, and then this structure here is known as a nephron. And the nephron is what makes the urine. So it has these different gradients and different permeabilities to solutions and solutes that allow the urine to be made. And depending on how much water we intake, it could produce diluted urine or it can produce concentrated urine. And we'll talk all about that in the second video. And then those nephrons connect to the collecting duct, which exits to the renal cortex, or I'm sorry, the renal pelvis, where it will then empty into the bladder. And so like I mentioned from the previous figure, the ureters transport urine from kidneys to the bladder. The urinary bladder stores the urine, and then the urethra carries the urine from the bladder to the outside of the body. Now, the urinary bladder is made up of 3 layers of smooth muscle that's lined with epithelial cells. And again, that smooth muscle will contract to empty the bladder, and that's involuntary. And then the urethra has 2 sphincters that control urination. There's actually a sphincter, we'll just show it here in the figure. There's actually an external sphincter. Right, so right here in males, that external sphincter is here in females. And then you have an internal sphincter that is right where the urethra connects with the bladder, and that controls the exit of the urine. Okay, so those 2 sphincters determine the movement of the urine. Males and females are a little different in terms of the kind of length of the urethra, and the fact that the openings are, the urethra goes through the penis in males and exits in the outer area of the labia in females. Um, and everything else though is similar. So 2 kidneys, the urethra, the ureter, the bladder, etc. Now, looking at the internal structure of the kidney, we'll really kind of focus on the nephron for a large portion of the chapter, because that is the functional unit of the kidney. That's what's making the urine in the kidney. And so the nephron is divided into 2 functional parts: the tubule, and then the blood supply that is contacting or interacting with the nephron. One kidney has about 1 million nephrons. So you have about 1 million of these structures per kidney that is making urine and cleaning the blood of excess water and excess waste. Each nephron is made up of a thin, hollow tube that comes into contact with the blood supply, and that urine is made as the filtrate comes out of the blood supply and runs through the nephron. And so the nephrons will remove about 800 liters of fluid from the blood daily, but will return about 99% of that fluid back to the body, and then will excrete a small percentage of that fluid and the waste that were filtered out of that fluid. So here we have an image of one nephron. So we've zoomed in to the kidney, right? You have the medulla in this red area here, right? So that's the medulla. And then you have the cortex up here. And then this yellow tubule, the loop, the brown red tubule, and then the capillaries here are all part of the nephron. So they're all associated with the nephron. Now the nephron is divided into several different structures. So this first structure here is known as the glomerular capsule. And this capsule houses a bed of capillaries known as the glomerulus. And this glomerulus is where the filtrate comes out of the blood. So this is where the blood is filtered. That filtrate will enter the glomerular capsule and then go through what's known as the proximal tubule. And then that proximal tubule is this thicker yellow colored tubule that's in the cortex. And then that tubule will go down into the medulla area, where it then does a loop. So it goes down, does a loop, comes back up. This loop is known as the loop of Henle. You have the descending limb and the ascending limb. And then the upper portion is known as the distal tubule. Okay, so this is bringing that filtrate back up into the cortex, where that distal tubule will connect to a collecting duct, and that collecting duct is connected to many, many nephrons, and it collects the urine that is produced from the nephrons and releases that urine, or brings that urine to the renal pelvis, where it will then empty to the bladder. Okay, and then that bladder will collect and store the urine until it's to be released from the body. And so we have all of those structures defined here for you. So the nephron structure, again, is the glomerular capsule. So it's the cup-like capsule that surrounds the glomerulus, which is that network of capillaries, and that's where filtration happens. And then the nephron, like we said, is a hollow tubule that can be broken down into different regions. The region that extends from the capsule to the medulla is the proximal tubule. The loop that goes from the medulla back to the cortex is the loop of Henle. And then the portion that goes back up into the cortex and connects to the collecting duct is the distal tubule. And then the collecting duct is again shared by many different nephrons and empties into the renal pelvis. Okay. And so the blood travels into the kidney and moves into the glomerulus, so that network of capillaries that's in the glomerular capsule, via the renal artery. So this supplies the blood to the kidney. So this is where all the blood comes in. And then the blood vessels are associated with the tubules of the nephron. So there are arterioles and capillaries and then veins that bring blood to and from the kidney. Okay, so the arterioles are afferent and efferent. So they enter the glomerular capsule and then leave the glomerular capsule. So A enters, E leaves, so afferent, efferent. And then the capillaries are in the glomerular capsule. So this network that's in that capsule where filtration happens. But then there are also two other capillary networks that are associated in the kidney. You have peritubular and vasorectal capillaries. The peritubular capillaries surround the proximal tubule and the distal tubule. The vasorectal capillaries run parallel with the loop of Henle. Right? So this allows for water and solute exchange with these areas of the nephron and the blood supply. Okay? And then the renal vein collects the filtered blood from the kidneys and carries it back through the circulatory system. So here we have an image of those capillaries. So you have your glomerulus, so the glomerular capsule. You have your afferent arteriole bringing blood into the capsule, and your efferent arteriole bringing blood out of the capsule. Then around the distal tubule, or I'm sorry, the proximal tubule, are peritubular capillaries, and also those peritubular capillaries are around the distal tubule here. Now around the nephron, you have the vasorecta. So these arteries and veins, arterioles and venules, run and connect with the vasorecta capillaries. Okay, so bringing that blood around and in contact with the loop of Henle. Okay, and so the way filtration happens is through several different processes. And there are a lot of things going on in the nephron. And since we've talked about kind of the structure of the nephron and the kidney, we're now going to take the second video to focus on the processes of filtration and how that exactly happens. Okay, and so with that, we'll see you in the second video.